My coffee was still steaming when Jessica walked into my office that Monday morning, clipboard in hand, designer heels clicking against the polished concrete floors I had personally chosen when we renovated this space 3 years ago. She didn't knock. She didn't smile. She didn't even look up from whatever document held her attention so completely. Instead, she delivered the words that would change everything with the emotional warmth of reading a grocery list. "We're terminating you," she announced, finally raising her eyes to meet mine. "Effective immediately. Security will escort you out." I set down my mug, carefully reached into my desk drawer, and pulled out the company badge that had been my daily companion for 5 years. As I placed it on the desk between us, I watched her confident expression flicker with the first hint of uncertainty. "Tell the board," I said quietly, "that I own 61%. Let me take you back to where this all began, because understanding my journey is crucial to grasping what Jessica and the board had truly walked into that morning. 5 years ago, I was Karen Mitchell, a 23-year-old Stanford dropout with nothing but a beat-up laptop, a head full of revolutionary ideas, and the kind of determination that only comes from having absolutely nothing left to lose. I had walked away from my computer science degree during my junior year, much to my parents' horror and my academic advisor's complete bewilderment. But I had seen something in the marketplace that the textbooks couldn't teach, and the professors couldn't understand. Small businesses across America were drowning in inventory management chaos, using outdated systems that cost fortunes and delivered headaches. I knew I could build something better, something that would revolutionize how these companies operated. My first office was the cramped garage of my shared apartment in Palo Alto, where I lived with 3 other aspiring entrepreneurs who survived on instant ramen and pure ambition. The concrete floor was perpetually cold, the fluorescent light buzzed incessantly, and the space smelled like motor oil mixed with the coffee I consumed in dangerous quantities. But in that unlikely birthplace, I coded the foundation of what would become InvenTrack Pro, working 18-hour days until my eyes burned and my fingers cramped. Those early months were a blur of sleepless nights and constant problem-solving. I slept on a second-hand couch that had more lumps than comfort, showered at the local gym for $15 a month, and ate peanut butter sandwiches for more meals than I care to remember. My social life disappeared entirely. Friends from college moved on to well-paying corporate jobs, while I remained hunched over my keyboard, debugging code and refining algorithms that I knew would change everything. The breakthrough came on a particularly brutal Tuesday in October. I had been wrestling with a complex database optimization problem for 3 weeks, and the solution suddenly crystallized at 2 a.m. My inventory management algorithm could process data 40% faster than anything currently available while using 60% less memory. The elegance of the solution was beautiful in its simplicity, and I knew I had created something special. I began approaching small business owners throughout the Bay Area, offering free trials of my software in exchange for feedback and testimonials. Maria Santos, who owned a thriving flower shop in San Jose, became my first real success story. Within 2 weeks of implementing my system, she reduced her inventory waste by 30% and increased her profit margins by 25%. Word spread quickly through the tight-knit small business community, and suddenly I had more clients than I could handle alone. The garage quickly became too small for my growing operation. I rented a modest office space in a converted warehouse, hired my first employee, a brilliant programmer named David Chen, and began the process of scaling my vision into a real company. The business grew organically, fueled by satisfied customers who recommended my services to their networks. Revenue doubled every quarter for the first 2 years, and I reinvested every penny back into development and expansion. but growth required capital beyond what my cash flow could provide. I needed servers, additional staff, marketing resources, and legal infrastructure to protect my intellectual property. That's when I made the decision that would prove so crucial 5 years later. I sought outside investment while maintaining absolute control over my company's future. I spent months working with corporate attorneys to structure a deal that would bring in the capital I needed without sacrificing my vision or authority. The solution was brilliantly complex. Investors would purchase shares in Inventrack Pro LLC, the operating company, but all major decisions would remain with Inventrack Holdings, Inc., which I owned entirely. The holding company controlled 61% of the voting rights in the operating company, ensuring that I could never be overruled or marginalized by outside interests. Dr. Hunter Hamilton, my former business strategy professor, became my first major advisor when he invested $200,000 in exchange for a 15% stake in the operating company. Sandra Walsh, a successful serial entrepreneur who had built and sold 3 tech companies, joined as both investor and mentor, bringing another $300,000 and invaluable industry connections. Additional investors followed, drawn by our impressive growth metrics and clear market advantages. The next 3 years were a whirlwind of expansion and success. We grew from my original garage operation to a 100-employee company occupying 3 floors of a gleaming office building in downtown San Francisco. Our client base expanded from local small businesses to regional chains and eventually to national retailers who relied on our sophisticated inventory management solutions. Fortune magazine featured us in their Companies to Watch section, and I was invited to speak at technology conferences across the country. Through it all, I maintained the same hands-on leadership style that had driven our initial success. I knew every employee by name, understood every aspect of our technology, and remained deeply involved in strategic decisions. The company culture reflected my values, innovation, integrity, and genuine care for both our team and our clients. But success brought new challenges. As we grew larger and more complex, my advisors began suggesting that I needed to step back from day-to-day operations and focus on higher-level strategy. They argued that my skill set, while perfect for building the company, might not be optimal for managing a mature organization. I listened to their concerns and agreed to bring in professional management to handle operational details while I maintained strategic oversight. That decision led directly to Jessica's hiring and the confrontation in my office that Monday morning. What my advisors hadn't told me, and what I was about to discover in the most painful way possible, was that they had already decided I was the problem that needed to be solved. The numbness I felt walking out of my own building that morning was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Security guards I had hired personally escorted me through the lobby I had designed, past the motivational quotes I had carefully selected for the walls, and out the front doors of the company I had built from nothing. But the shock of Jessica's cold dismissal was nothing compared to what I discovered when I returned to my apartment and began investigating what had really happened. My first call was to my lawyer, Patricia Reeves, who had structured the original investment agreements. Her confusion was immediately apparent when I explained the morning's events. "Karen, that's impossible," she said, and I could hear papers shuffling in the background. "Your holding company structure specifically prevents anyone from terminating you without your own consent. Let me review the documents, but something is very wrong here." While Patricia conducted her legal research, I began my own investigation. 5 years of building a company teaches you to keep detailed records, and I had maintained copies of every important email contract and financial document. What I found in those files made my blood run cold. The trail began 3 months earlier with a seemingly innocent email from Dr. Hamilton to Sandra Walsh. I had been copied on the original message, which appeared to be a routine discussion about quarterly performance metrics. But buried in my email archives were follow-up messages between them that I had never seen, messages that revealed a coordinated campaign to undermine my leadership. Karen's emotional attachment to every decision is slowing our growth potential, Dr. Hamilton had written. She micromanages talented people and resists the kind of strategic thinking we need for the next phase. Sandra's response was even more damaging. I've been in touch with several executive search firms. We need someone with Fortune 500 experience who can bring mature leadership to the organization. Corinne built something impressive, but builders aren't always the best leaders for scaling operations. The correspondence continued for weeks, with increasingly detailed discussions about my supposed shortcomings. They criticized my hands-on management style as controlling and outdated. They questioned my strategic vision as limited by her narrow technical background. They even analyzed my personality, describing me as too emotionally invested to make difficult decisions. But the most painful discovery was how they had recruited other board members to their perspective. Thomas Wright, who had invested early because he believed in my vision, had been systematically convinced that I was holding back the company's potential. Margaret Foster, whose retail expertise had been invaluable during our expansion phase, had been fed a steady stream of carefully crafted concerns about my leadership capabilities. The conspiracy went deeper than I had imagined. They had retained an executive search firm to identify candidates for a new CEO position, a position that would effectively make me a figurehead in my own company. Jessica's resume had been circulated among the conspirators for weeks before she was officially interviewed, and her hiring had been predetermined before I was even informed about the search process. Email chains revealed detailed discussions about how to manage Karen's transition to a less operational role. They had planned to offer me a new title, Chief Innovation Officer, that would remove me from day-to-day decision-making while preserving the appearance that I remained important to the company's future. The goal was to marginalize my influence gradually, making me irrelevant to the organization I had created. Most devastating was discovering that my trusted mentors had already begun valuing the company for a potential sale. Sandra had reached out to 3 different investment banks to explore acquisition opportunities, describing me as willing to step back from operational responsibilities and eager to explore exit strategies. They were positioning me as ready to sell when I had never expressed any interest in walking away from my life's work. Reading through months of secret communications felt like watching a slow-motion betrayal unfold. These people had sat in my conference room, eaten at my table, celebrated our successes together, and praised my leadership to my face while systematically plotting my removal behind my back. Every encouraging word they had spoken was revealed as manipulation, every piece of advice as calculated misdirection. The emotional impact was staggering. These weren't distant business rivals or competitive threats. Dr. Hamilton had been my favorite professor, the one who had encouraged me to think bigger than my narrow technical focus. Sandra had become almost a mother figure, someone I had turned to for guidance during the most challenging periods of building the company. I had trusted them completely, shared my fears and uncertainties, and relied on their wisdom to navigate complex decisions. But perhaps most painful was realizing how thoroughly they had misunderstood both me and my company. Their communications revealed a fundamental belief that I was an obstacle to success rather than its primary driver. They saw my deep knowledge of our technology as micromanaging rather than essential expertise. They interpreted my close relationships with employees as emotional weakness rather than leadership strength. They completely failed to understand that my hands-on approach wasn't a character flaw, but the foundation of our competitive advantage. The final piece of the puzzle came when I discovered a document that Sandra had prepared for the other board members titled Transition Planning for Sustainable Growth. The 18-page presentation laid out a detailed argument for why I needed to be removed from operational control, complete with charts comparing our growth rates to theoretical projections under different leadership scenarios. She had essentially written my obituary as a leader, concluding that while I had been instrumental in the company's early success, my continued involvement in day-to-day operations posed significant risks to long-term value creation. The presentation recommended Jessica's hiring as the first step in a broader transformation that would professionalize our management structure and prepare the company for either rapid expansion or strategic acquisition. As I sat in my apartment that evening, surrounded by printed emails and legal documents, the full scope of the betrayal crystallized. This wasn't a simple disagreement about leadership style or strategic direction. This was a calculated attempt to steal the company I had built using my own trust and respect for my mentors as weapons against me. But they had made one critical error in their planning. In their eagerness to remove me from power, they had never bothered to truly understand the legal structure that governed that power, and that oversight was about to become their downfall. Patricia called me at 7:30 the next morning, and I could hear the excitement in her voice before she spoke her first word. "Karen, we need to meet immediately," she said. "I've spent the entire night reviewing your corporate documents, and Jessica's termination announcement is completely invalid. More than that, she doesn't have the legal authority to make such decisions in the first place." Her downtown office overlooked the bay, and the morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows as she spread legal documents across her massive mahogany desk. But I barely noticed the view. My attention was focused entirely on the papers that would determine whether I had lost everything or still controlled my destiny. "Let me explain exactly what you created 5 years ago." Patricia began pulling out the original investment agreements. This structure was brilliant precisely because it anticipated this kind of situation. Your advisors convinced other investors to participate without understanding what they were actually agreeing to. She pointed to a specific clause in the holding company documents. Inventrack Holdings Incorporated owns 61% of the voting shares in Inventrack Pro LLC. You own 100% of Inventrack Holdings. That means regardless of what percentage other investors own in the operating company, you control the majority of voting rights. The implications began to sink in as she continued her explanation. Every major decision, including personnel changes at the executive level, requires approval from the majority voting shareholders. Jessica can't terminate you because she works for a company that you effectively control. The board can't override you because they don't have sufficient voting power to do so. But the legal protection went even deeper than I had remembered. Patricia pulled out another document, this one thick with technical language and multiple appendices. The management agreement we drafted specifically requires shareholder approval for any changes to your role or responsibilities. Even if Jessica had the authority to make personnel decisions, which she doesn't, your position is contractually protected by the very structure your advisors helped create. I studied the documents with growing amazement. 5 years ago, I had been so focused on protecting myself from being cheated by investors that I had created an almost impregnable legal fortress around my authority. The complexity of the structure had been intentional, designed to make it nearly impossible for outside parties to understand or circumvent my control. But how did they miss this? I asked. Sandra and Dr. Hamilton were involved in creating this structure. They had to know what it meant. Patricia smiled grimly. I think they got caught up in their own excitement about removing you from power. People often see what they want to see, and they wanted to see a path to taking control. They focused on the percentage ownership in the operating company and ignored the voting control held by the holding company. She pulled out copies of the emails I had discovered the previous day. Look at their correspondence again. They talk about owning 67% of the company between all the investors, which is true if you only count operating company shares. But they never mention voting control, which suggests they either forgot about the holding company structure or never fully understood it. The mistake was understandable but catastrophic for their plans. When outside investors had purchased shares in Inventrack Pro LLC, they had received legitimate ownership stakes that entitled them to proportional profits and dividends. But the voting rights that controlled major decisions remained with Inventrack Holdings, which I owned completely. It was like buying most of the seats in a theater, but discovering that someone else still controlled the lighting, sound, and curtain. Patricia's research revealed an even more damaging truth. Jessica's employment contract specifically states that her authority comes from the board of directors of Inventrack Pro LLC, but the board's authority comes from the shareholders, and the majority shareholder is your holding company. Legally, she serves at your pleasure, not the other way around. The irony was delicious. In their eagerness to bring in professional management, my advisors had hired someone whose job security depended entirely on my approval. Jessica had walked into my office that morning believing she held all the cards, when in reality she was completely dependent on the person she was trying to eliminate. "What about the board?" I asked. "Can they challenge this somehow?" Patricia shook her head. "The board composition is defined by the shareholder agreement. You have the right to appoint 4 of the 7 board members, giving you control of board decisions as well. Your advisors hold 3 seats collectively, but they can't outvote your appointed representatives." I realized that my advisors had spent months planning a coup against someone who legally couldn't be overthrown. They had crafted detailed strategies for removing me from power without bothering to verify that such removal was actually possible. Their conspiracy had been doomed from the moment they conceived it. But Patricia's research had uncovered something even more interesting than my legal protections. "I've been reviewing Jessica's background based on the information in your corporate files. Her previous employment history raises some serious red flags." She handed me a folder containing employment records and reference checks that should have been completed before Jessica's hiring. Her last 3 positions ended under questionable circumstances. Summit Technologies terminated her for policy violations after 18 months. Peak Consulting let her go during a restructuring that seemed to target only her position. Mountain View Systems doesn't even list her in their corporate directory, despite her claiming 2 years of employment there. The pattern suggested either severe performance issues or something more problematic. Patricia had requested additional information from our corporate investigation firm, but preliminary findings indicated that Jessica's sterling recommendations had come from references who were either impossible to verify or had questionable relationships with her previous employers. "I think your advisors were so focused on finding someone willing to remove you from power that they didn't conduct proper due diligence on their candidate," Patricia concluded. "They may have hired someone whose primary qualification was a willingness to do what they wanted, not someone with the skills to actually run your company." As I sat in Patricia's office that morning, surrounded by legal documents that proved my continued authority and background reports that questioned Jessica's qualifications, I felt a shift in my emotional state. The shock and hurt of the previous day were transforming into something more powerful and focused. My advisors had betrayed my trust and attempted to steal my company. Jessica had walked into my office with the arrogance of someone who believed she held ultimate power. But they had all made the same crucial mistake. They had underestimated both my intelligence and my preparation. I had not built my company by accident or luck. Every decision I had made, including the complex legal structure that protected my interests, had been carefully considered and expertly executed. The same strategic thinking that had created Inventrack Pro from nothing was now positioned to protect it from those who would destroy everything I had built. The time for defense was over. It was time to take back control. Armed with the knowledge of my legal position, I began a systematic investigation into Jessica's activities during her brief tenure as director. What I discovered over the following week revealed a pattern of financial irregularities that transformed the situation from a simple power struggle into potential criminal fraud. My first step was accessing the company's financial records through my shareholder rights. As the majority voting shareholder, I had absolute authority to review any corporate documents, and I exercised that right extensively. What I found in the expense reports and vendor payments made my stomach turn. Jessica had been with the company for exactly 37 days, yet she had already submitted expense reports totaling over $15,000. The receipts told a story of extravagant spending that had nothing to do with legitimate business activities. 3 dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants, each exceeding $400 per person, were classified as client development meetings, with no record of which clients had attended. A weekend stay at the Ritz-Carlton in Half Moon Bay was labeled as a strategic planning retreat, despite no other employees being present. Most troubling were the vendor payments she had authorized during her first 3 weeks. A company called Streamline Business Solutions had received 2 payments totaling $28,000 for consulting services, but no contract existed in our legal files. When I called the phone number listed for Streamline Business Solutions, I reached a generic voicemail with no company identification. Further investigation revealed that Streamline Business Solutions had been incorporated in Delaware just 6 weeks before Jessica's hiring, with a registered agent address that traced to a mail forwarding service. The company's business license listed its primary activity as management consulting, but it had no website, no employee directory, and no verifiable business address. I hired a private investigator named Marcus Webb to dig deeper into Jessica's background and recent activities. Marcus was a former FBI agent who specialized in corporate fraud investigations, and his findings painted a disturbing picture of systematic deception. "Your new director has a history," Marcus reported during our meeting at his office. "Real name is Jessica Lynn Morrison, but she's used at least 3 different variations of her name in previous employment. She was actually terminated from Summit Technologies for embezzling $62,000 through fake vendor payments, exactly like what you're seeing now." The investigative report detailed a sophisticated scheme that Jessica had apparently perfected over several years. She would join companies in senior positions, establish relationships with fake vendors that she controlled, and authorize payments for non-existent services. The amounts were always small enough to avoid triggering automatic approval processes, but large enough to generate substantial personal income. Peak Consulting fired her for the same thing, Marcus continued. They discovered she had created shell companies to bill for marketing services that were never performed. Mountain View Systems went even further and referred her case to the district attorney's office, but she disappeared before charges could be filed. The pattern was clear and damaging. Jessica was a professional fraudster who specialized in exploiting the trust placed in senior executives. My advisors, in their rush to find someone willing to remove me from power, had hired a criminal without conducting even basic background verification. But Marcus's investigation revealed an even more disturbing truth. "She didn't just randomly apply for this position," he explained. "Someone specifically recommended her for the job and vouched for her qualifications. Based on the communications I've uncovered, it appears Dr. Hamilton made the initial contact. The implications were staggering. Either Dr. Hamilton had been completely negligent in his recommendation, or he had knowingly brought a criminal into my company. Given the thoroughness of the conspiracy, I had already uncovered neither possibility reflected well on his judgment or integrity. I requested access to Jessica's company computer and phone records, which I had the legal authority to examine as the majority shareholder. What I found there provided the final pieces of the puzzle. Jessica had been in regular communication with an accountant named David Price, who appeared to be helping her establish additional shell companies for future fraudulent activities. Email exchanges between Jessica and David revealed plans to create 3 more fake vendors over the following 2 months. Efficient office systems would bill for non-existent equipment purchases. Professional development associates would charge for training seminars that would never occur. Strategic marketing partners would submit invoices for advertising services that existed only on paper. The total projected fraud exceeded $150,000 over 6 months' money that would have been stolen directly from the company I had built and the employees who depended on its success. Jessica hadn't just accepted a position to help remove me from power. She had viewed my company as a personal piggy bank to be looted systematically. Perhaps most infuriating was discovering that Jessica had already begun laying groundwork to blame the financial irregularities on my previous management. Draft memos found on her computer described systemic control weaknesses and inadequate financial oversight that she claimed to have inherited from prior leadership. She was preparing to position herself as the hero who had discovered problems created by my incompetence. The security implications went beyond simple theft. Jessica had been granted access to our proprietary algorithms and client databases information that could be extremely valuable to competitors. Phone records showed numerous calls to unknown numbers during off hours, suggesting possible industrial espionage in addition to financial fraud. Armed with this evidence, I scheduled a meeting with our head of security, a former police detective named Sarah Kim, who had joined us 2 years earlier. Sarah's experience in financial crimes investigations proved invaluable in documenting the evidence properly for potential criminal prosecution. "This is a textbook case of executive fraud," Sarah concluded after reviewing the findings. "She's got all the classic patterns: fake vendors, inflated expenses, and documentation that doesn't match the claimed activities. We've got enough evidence for felony charges." But Sarah's investigation revealed one more crucial detail that I hadn't expected. "Someone else has been accessing these financial records recently," she reported. "The system logs show that Dr. Hamilton viewed several of the same documents you've been examining, including the suspicious vendor payments. He's known about the fraud for at least a week, but hasn't reported it." The betrayal was now complete. Not only had my trusted advisor brought a criminal into my company, but he had discovered evidence of that criminal's activities and chosen to remain silent. His failure to report known fraud made him potentially complicit in Jessica's crimes. As I sat in my apartment that evening, surrounded by evidence of conspiracy and fraud, I felt a clarity that had been missing since Jessica's termination announcement. This was no longer about hurt feelings or wounded pride. This was about protecting my company, my employees, and my life's work from people who would destroy everything for personal gain. The next morning, I would exercise the legal authority that my advisors had forgotten I possessed. But first, I had one more investigation to complete, one that would reveal the true scope of the betrayal I had suffered. The final piece of the conspiracy emerged when I gained access to Dr. Hamilton's university email account through a Freedom of Information request. As a public university employee, his electronic communications were subject to disclosure laws, and what I discovered in those emails revealed a level of betrayal that exceeded everything I had uncovered before. The email trail began 6 months earlier, long before the formal conspiracy I had already documented. Dr. Hamilton had been in communication with executives at 3 major technology companies, Tech Global Industries Synapse Corporation and Digital Solutions International. Each company had expressed interest in acquiring smaller firms with strong inventory management capabilities, and Dr. Hamilton had been positioning my company as an ideal acquisition target. InvenTrack Pro represents exactly the kind of innovative technology your company needs to dominate the SMB market, he had written to Tech Global's chief strategy officer. The founder is brilliant but young and would benefit from the resources and guidance that an established corporation could provide. But the most damaging correspondence was with Margaret Chen, a senior vice president at Synapse Corporation who specialized in technology acquisitions. Dr. Hamilton had provided detailed financial information about my company, including proprietary revenue projections and client data that should have been strictly confidential. Corinne has built something impressive, but she lacks the vision to scale it properly, he wrote in one email. With proper backing and experienced management, this technology could capture 30% of the SMB inventory management market within 3 years. The emails revealed that Dr. Hamilton had been working on a potential acquisition deal for months without my knowledge or consent. He had positioned himself as the primary contact for negotiations, describing his relationship with me as mentor and advisor, and claiming authority to guide her decision-making process regarding strategic opportunities. Even more troubling was his correspondence with Sandra Walsh, which showed that they had coordinated their approach to potential buyers. Sandra had been working the West Coast acquisition targets, while Dr. Hamilton focused on East Coast opportunities. Together, they had created a comprehensive marketing campaign designed to sell my company without my involvement or approval. The key is positioning this as an opportunity to acquire both proven technology and a talented team while resolving leadership challenges, Sandra had written. Corinne is passionate about the technical side, but recognizes her limitations in strategic management. She's already agreed to step back from operational responsibilities. Of course, I had never agreed to any such thing, but their communications suggested that they had been telling potential buyers I was eager to transition to a less active role, possibly even to sell the company entirely. They were essentially conducting sale negotiations based on completely false representations of my intentions and desires. The financial details in their correspondence were particularly infuriating. Dr. Hamilton had calculated that a strategic acquisition could value the company at between $50 and $75 million, depending on the buyer's integration plans and growth projections. He had already begun discussing how the proceeds would be distributed among shareholders, assuming that I would gratefully accept whatever offer they negotiated on my behalf. But the most shocking discovery was a draft letter of intent that Dr. Hamilton had prepared for Synapse Corporation. The document outlined terms for acquiring InvenTrack Pro for $62 million, with specific provisions for retaining key employees and maintaining our San Francisco operations. The letter included detailed transition timelines, integration plans, and even suggested organizational charts for the combined company. At the bottom of the document, Dr. Hamilton had included signature lines for both parties, Synapse Corporation and InvenTrack Pro LLC. But the signature line for my company listed Dr. Hamilton's name, not mine, as the authorized representative. He was literally preparing to sell my company and sign the agreements himself. Legal research confirmed what I suspected. Dr. Hamilton had no authority whatsoever to negotiate on behalf of my company. His board position gave him advisory responsibilities and limited fiduciary duties, but it absolutely did not grant him power to enter into acquisition discussions or sign binding agreements. Every communication he had sent to potential buyers exceeded his legal authority and potentially constituted fraud. The timeline revealed the true motivation behind Jessica's hiring. The acquisition discussions had reached advanced stages, with multiple buyers expressing serious interest in moving forward with formal offers. But those buyers required assurance that the company had stable, experienced leadership in place before finalizing their proposals. Jessica's hiring wasn't just about removing me from operational control. It was about demonstrating to potential acquirers that professional management was already in place. Dr. Hamilton's final email to Margaret Chen at Synapse Corporation was dated just 2 days before Jessica's termination announcement. "Management transition is proceeding as planned," he wrote. "New director is in place and operational control has been transferred. Founder will remain in advisory capacity but will not be involved in day-to-day decisions. Please proceed with formal offer preparation." The betrayal was now revealed in its full scope. My trusted advisors hadn't just conspired to remove me from power. They had been actively working to sell my company to the highest bidder while systematically eliminating my ability to prevent or control that sale. They had hired a criminal to execute their plan, provided confidential information to potential buyers without authorization, and prepared legal documents to complete transactions they had no right to negotiate. But perhaps most personally painful was discovering that Dr. Hamilton had been discussing my supposed character flaws and leadership limitations with complete strangers. His emails to potential buyers described me as technically brilliant but strategically naive, emotionally attached to operational details, and in need of guidance from more experienced business leaders. This was the professor who had encouraged me to think beyond my engineering background, who had praised my entrepreneurial instincts, and who had celebrated my early successes as validation of his teaching methods. To discover that he had been systematically undermining my reputation with industry leaders while pretending to support my growth was devastating. The financial implications of their scheme were staggering. If they had succeeded in forcing through an acquisition at $62 million, I would have received approximately $38 million as the majority shareholder. But independent valuations I had commissioned suggested that my company was worth closer to $120 million in the current market, meaning their deal would have cost me over $50 million in lost value. They weren't just stealing my company, they were stealing it at a fraction of its true worth. The buyers they had contacted were all known for acquiring promising technologies at discount prices, then maximizing profits through cost-cutting and market domination. My employees would have faced layoffs, my clients would have suffered service degradation, and my innovative culture would have been destroyed in favor of corporate efficiency. As I reviewed the final emails in Dr. Hamilton's account, I felt a cold fury unlike anything I had ever experienced. These people had taken my trust, my respect, and my genuine affection for them as mentors, then used those feelings as weapons to destroy everything I had built. They had conspired not just against my business interests, but against my personal dreams and the livelihood of everyone who depended on my company's success. But they had made one critical error in their calculations. They had assumed that removing me from operational control would be the end of my ability to influence the company's future. They had never bothered to verify that assumption against the legal reality of corporate ownership and voting control. Tomorrow morning, I would demonstrate exactly how wrong they had been. I arrived at the Inventrack Pro offices at 8 o'clock Thursday morning, exactly 1 hour before the regular business day began. Patricia accompanied me carrying a briefcase full of legal documents and corporate resolutions that would restore order to the chaos my company had become. Sarah Kim, our head of security, met us in the lobby with building access codes and a comprehensive plan for securing all evidence related to Jessica's fraudulent activities. The first order of business was regaining physical control of my office and computer systems. Jessica had changed the locks and access codes, but as the majority shareholder, I had absolute authority to override those security measures. Within 15 minutes, I was seated behind my own desk for the first time in 4 days, reviewing the damage that had been done to my company during my brief absence. Jessica had been busy during her final days in power. Email logs showed that she had deleted numerous files from the corporate servers, including financial records and client communications that would have documented her fraudulent activities. But our automated backup systems had preserved everything, and Sarah's forensic investigation quickly restored the missing information. More troubling was evidence that Jessica had been preparing to transfer proprietary technology to outside parties. Draft emails in her deleted files referenced licensing opportunities and strategic partnerships that would have given competitors access to our most valuable intellectual property. One communication with David Price, her accountant accomplice, specifically discussed monetizing trade secrets before her departure from current position. At 9 o'clock sharp, I convened an emergency meeting of the board of directors. The conference room felt different now that I understood the true loyalties of the people gathered around the mahogany table I had personally selected 3 years earlier. Dr. Hamilton, Sandra Walsh, Thomas Wright, and Margaret Foster sat across from my 4 appointed board members, unaware that their conspiracy had been completely exposed. "I'm calling this meeting to address several urgent matters affecting the company," I began, my voice steady despite the emotions churning beneath the surface. "First, I'm exercising my authority as majority voting shareholder to immediately terminate Jessica Morrison's employment for cause." Dr. Hamilton started to object, but I continued without pausing. "Second, I'm terminating the board appointments of Dr. Hamilton, Sandra Walsh, Thomas Wright, and Margaret Foster, effective immediately for breach of fiduciary duty and violation of their obligations to act in the company's best interests." The room erupted in protests and demands for explanation, but Patricia stood and began distributing copies of the evidence we had compiled. Email printouts, financial records, investigative reports, and legal analyses painted a comprehensive picture of conspiracy and fraud that left little room for denial or justification. These documents detail systematic attempts to undermine corporate governance, unauthorized communications with potential acquirers, and knowing participation in financial fraud, Patricia explained in her calm, professional tone. Each terminated board member has violated their fiduciary duties and potentially exposed themselves to civil and criminal liability. Sandra was the first to break the stunned silence. "Karen, you're making a terrible mistake. We were trying to help you build something sustainable. Your emotional reaction to professional management recommendations is exactly the kind of behavior that concerns us about your leadership. But I was no longer the trusting young entrepreneur they had manipulated for months. Sandra, you've been secretly negotiating to sell my company for $62 million to buyers who value it at over $120 million. That's not helping me build anything. That's stealing $58 million from me and every other shareholder." Dr. Hamilton tried a different approach. "The acquisition discussions were preliminary market research, nothing more. We needed to understand the company's value in the current market to make informed strategic decisions." "You prepared a letter of intent with your signature on behalf of my company," I replied, sliding a copy of the document across the table. "You had no legal authority to represent this company in any capacity beyond your advisory role, which you've now forfeited through your breach of fiduciary duty." Thomas Wright, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke. "What about Jessica? Are you accusing us of knowingly hiring someone dishonest?" Sarah Kim stepped forward and placed a thick folder on the conference table. "Jessica Morrison has embezzled over $43,000 through fake vendor payments during her 37 days of employment. She's a professional fraudster with a history of identical schemes at 3 previous companies. Dr. Hamilton recommended her for this position despite readily available evidence of her criminal background. The impact of that revelation was immediate and devastating. Even Sandra, who had maintained her composure throughout the meeting, visibly paled as she realized the implications of being associated with known financial crimes. "I've already contacted the FBI's white-collar crime division," I continued. Jessica will be arrested later today on federal fraud charges. Anyone who knowingly participated in or concealed her activities may face additional charges as accomplices. Margaret Foster, who had been reviewing the evidence documents, looked up with genuine shock in her eyes. Karen, I had no idea about any acquisition discussions or financial irregularities. I was told that bringing in professional management was necessary for the company's growth, nothing more. I studied her expression carefully. Unlike the others, Margaret appeared genuinely surprised by the scope of the conspiracy. Her investment had been smaller and more recent, and the email evidence suggested she had been manipulated rather than actively participating in the scheme. Margaret, your termination is rescinded, I decided. But you'll be required to participate fully in our internal investigation and provide testimony for any criminal proceedings that may result. The meeting concluded with the formal appointment of new board members, all of whom had been carefully vetted for both competence and integrity. Dr. Patricia Reeves agreed to serve as the new board chair, bringing legal expertise and unquestionable ethical standards to corporate governance. Michael Torres, the former CEO of a successful logistics company, accepted the role of independent director. Jennifer Walsh, a respected financial expert with no relation to Sandra, rounded out the reconstituted board. By noon, security had escorted the terminated board members from the building and changed all access codes to prevent unauthorized entry. Jessica's office was sealed pending the FBI investigation, and IT had secured all electronic systems to preserve evidence for criminal prosecution. But the most important task remained communicating with our employees about the dramatic changes in leadership and governance. I had scheduled an all-hands meeting for 2 o'clock, and the success of that communication would determine whether my company could move forward with unity and confidence. The auditorium was packed when I took the stage that Thursday afternoon. Faces I had worked alongside for years looked back at me with mixtures of confusion, concern, and curiosity. These were the people who had believed in my vision, contributed their talents to building something special, and trusted me to protect their professional futures. Over the past week, you've witnessed significant changes in our leadership structure, I began. I want to explain what happened and assure you that these changes will strengthen our company and protect all of our interests. I outlined the conspiracy and fraud without revealing all the personal details, focusing instead on the professional implications and legal violations that had necessitated immediate action. The audience listened with growing amazement as I described Jessica's criminal background, the unauthorized acquisition negotiations, and the systematic attempt to undermine corporate governance. Your jobs are secure, I emphasized. Our client relationships are strong. Our technology remains innovative and competitive. The only thing that's changed is that we've removed people who were working against our collective interests. The questions that followed revealed both the intelligence of our team and their genuine concern for the company's future. David Chen, my first employee and now our chief technology officer, asked about the impact on our product development timeline. Maria Santos, who had been promoted to head of client relations, wanted assurance that our service commitments would be maintained. Jennifer Kim from Human Resources raised concerns about employee morale and retention. Each question received honest, detailed answers that demonstrated my continued deep involvement in every aspect of the business. By the end of the meeting, the mood in the auditorium had shifted from uncertainty to renewed confidence and enthusiasm. The final validation came when our entire development team submitted a letter expressing their support for my leadership and their commitment to the company's future success. We've always known that Corinne built this company with vision and integrity, the letter stated. Recent events have only confirmed that our trust was well placed. That evening, as I sat in my restored office reviewing the day's events, I felt a satisfaction deeper than any I had experienced during our most successful product launches or profitable quarters. I had not just survived an attempt to steal my company, I had emerged stronger and more determined than ever. The conspiracy had revealed weaknesses in our governance structure that could now be addressed. The fraud had exposed security vulnerabilities that could be corrected. Most importantly, the betrayal had taught me valuable lessons about trust leadership and the difference between advisors who truly support your success and those who view you as an obstacle to their own ambitions. 6 months later, I stood before a packed auditorium at the San Francisco Convention Center, delivering the keynote address to the National Small Business Technology Conference. The title of my presentation was Building Resilient Leadership Lessons from Betrayal and Recovery, and the audience of entrepreneurs hung on every word as I shared the story of how I had nearly lost everything I had built, then fought back to create something even stronger. True leadership isn't tested when everything goes according to plan. I explained to the audience of 500 business owners and startup founders. It's tested when the people you trust most turn against you, when criminals infiltrate your organization, and when your life's work hangs in the balance. How you respond to those challenges defines not just your company's future, but your character as a leader. The past 6 months had been a period of unprecedented growth and transformation for InvenTrack Pro. With honest, competent leadership in place and the distraction of internal conspiracies eliminated, we had focused entirely on serving our clients and expanding our market presence. Revenue had increased by 47% over the previous year, and our client satisfaction ratings had reached all-time highs. But the most meaningful changes had been in our company culture and governance structure. I had implemented comprehensive transparency policies that gave all employees access to financial performance data and strategic planning discussions. Monthly town hall meetings provided forums for open communication about company direction and individual concerns. An employee stock option program ensured that everyone who contributed to our success would share in the financial rewards of that success. The new board of directors had proven invaluable in providing strategic guidance while respecting my operational authority. Patricia's legal expertise had helped us strengthen our intellectual property protections and governance policies. Michael Torres had opened doors to major retail clients who had dramatically expanded our market reach. Jennifer Walsh had restructured our financial controls to prevent future fraud while improving operational efficiency. Most importantly, we had established a formal mentorship program that paired experienced entrepreneurs with emerging business leaders. Unlike my previous experience with advisors who had their own hidden agendas, this program focused on genuine knowledge transfer and authentic relationship building. I personally mentored 6 young entrepreneurs who reminded me of my earlier self, brilliant, passionate, and vulnerable to those who would exploit their trust. The criminal justice system had delivered appropriate consequences for those who had betrayed that trust. Jessica Morrison had been sentenced to 3 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution for her embezzlement activities. The FBI investigation had uncovered evidence of similar fraud at 4 other companies, adding additional charges that extended her sentence considerably. Dr. Hamilton had escaped criminal prosecution, but faced significant civil liability for his unauthorized negotiations with potential acquirers. The university had terminated his employment after an internal investigation revealed violations of professional ethics and conflict of interest policies. His reputation in the academic community had been permanently damaged, effectively ending his career as a business educator. Sandra Walsh had settled a civil lawsuit for $2.3 million, representing her estimated profits from the planned sale of my company at below-market prices. The settlement included a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement and permanent restrictions on her ability to invest in or advise technology companies. Her previously successful track record as a serial entrepreneur had been overshadowed by the scandal, making it difficult for her to raise capital for future ventures. But perhaps the most satisfying outcome had been our decision to reject all acquisition offers and continue building the company independently. 2 months after resolving the conspiracy, Tech Global Industries had approached us directly with an offer of $95 million. Synapse Corporation had followed with a competing bid of $120 million. Digital Solutions International had topped both offers at $135 million. We had turned down all 3 offers. The decision reflected a hard-won understanding of what truly mattered in building a sustainable business. Money was important, but it wasn't the primary measure of success. Creating innovative solutions that genuinely helped our clients succeed, building a workplace culture that attracted and retained exceptional talent, and maintaining the freedom to pursue our vision without external interference were far more valuable than any acquisition price. Our independence had also allowed us to pursue opportunities that would have been impossible under corporate ownership. We had launched an industry-leading apprenticeship program that trained unemployed workers in technology skills while providing them with meaningful career paths. Our environmental sustainability initiative had achieved carbon neutrality 2 years ahead of our original projections. Most importantly, we had maintained the personal relationships with clients that had always been the foundation of our competitive advantage. Standing before the conference audience that day, I reflected on how the betrayal that had nearly destroyed my company had ultimately made it stronger and more resilient. The conspiracy had forced me to examine every aspect of our operations' governance and culture, identifying weaknesses that could be addressed and strengths that could be enhanced. The most important lesson I learned, I continued my presentation, is the difference between advisors who want to help you succeed and advisors who want to succeed through you. True mentors invest in your growth without expecting to control your decisions. They provide guidance while respecting your authority. They celebrate your achievements without claiming credit for your success. The audience responded with enthusiastic applause, and the question and answer session that followed revealed how many entrepreneurs had faced similar challenges with dishonest advisors, fraudulent employees, or attempted corporate takeovers. My story had resonated not because it was unique, but because it represented struggles that many business leaders faced but rarely discussed publicly. After the conference, I returned to my office, energized by the connections I had made with fellow entrepreneurs and excited about new opportunities for collaboration and growth. The company I had nearly lost was now stronger than I had ever imagined it could be, built on foundations of authenticity, integrity, and genuine value creation, rather than the shifting sands of convenient relationships and hidden agendas. That evening, as I reviewed emails from conference attendees who wanted to share their own stories or seek advice about similar challenges, I realized that my experience had equipped me to help others navigate the complex world of business relationships and corporate governance. The pain of betrayal had been transformed into wisdom that could benefit entrepreneurs who were just beginning their journeys. My assistant knocked on the door and entered with a smile that I had learned to associate with good news. "There's someone here to see you," she announced. "A young woman who says she's building an app to help restaurants manage their supply chains. She heard your presentation today and was hoping you might have a few minutes to offer some guidance." I looked at my calendar and saw that I had planned to review quarterly financial reports for the next hour. But mentoring emerging entrepreneurs had become one of my favorite responsibilities, and the financial reports could wait until tomorrow morning. "Send her in," I decided. "And could you order some coffee? Something tells me this is going to be a longer conversation than either of us expects." As I waited for my visitor, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 5 years ago, I had been a dropout with a revolutionary idea and no understanding of how to protect myself from those who would exploit my trust. Today, I was the leader of a thriving company with the wisdom to recognize authentic relationships and the courage to defend what I had built. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed everything I cared about had instead taught me the most valuable lessons of my entrepreneurial career. I had learned to distinguish between advisors and opportunists, between professional disagreements and personal attacks, between temporary setbacks and permanent defeats. Most importantly, I had learned that true strength comes not from avoiding challenges, but from facing them with integrity and determination. The people who had tried to steal my company had ultimately given me something far more valuable, the knowledge that I could survive their worst efforts and emerge stronger than ever. Now I had the privilege of sharing that knowledge with others who were facing their own struggles and uncertainties. The mentorship program I had established wasn't just about business strategy or technical skills, it was about building the character and wisdom necessary to lead with authenticity and purpose. When my young visitor entered the office, I saw in her eyes the same combination of passion, vulnerability, and determination that I remembered from my own early days as an entrepreneur. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who believed in her vision, but also with the uncertainty of someone who wasn't yet sure how to protect that vision from those who would corrupt or destroy it. "Thank you so much for agreeing to meet with me," she began, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Your presentation today really resonated with me because I'm dealing with some investors who want to bring in a new CEO, and I'm not sure whether I should trust their judgment or fight for my continued involvement." I smiled, recognizing a story that I knew all too well. This was exactly the kind of situation where authentic mentorship could make the difference between a young entrepreneur protecting her vision and losing everything she had built to people with their own agendas. "Let's start with the basics," I replied, pulling out a legal pad to take notes. "Tell me about your company, your investors, and what specific concerns they've raised about your leadership. And then tell me what your instincts are telling you about their motivations." As she began her story, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from using hard-won wisdom to help others navigate challenges that could define their professional futures. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed my company had been transformed into knowledge that could protect other entrepreneurs from similar fates. The circle of mentorship and growth was complete, but the work of building authentic relationships and defending entrepreneurial vision would continue for as long as passionate people dared to create something meaningful in the world. Before we conclude today's story, I want to ask you something that I think about often. Have you ever trusted someone completely only to discover they were working against your interests? How did you rebuild that trust in yourself and others? Share your experiences in the comments below, because I believe we all learn from each other's stories of betrayal and recovery. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more tales of resilience and triumph. And don't forget to share this video with someone who might need to hear that it's possible to fight back and win even when the odds seem impossible. Thank you for joining me on this journey from betrayal to victory. Remember that your vision is worth protecting, your instincts are worth trusting, and your determination can overcome even the most calculated attempts to steal what you've built. Until next time, keep building something meaningful and never let anyone convince you that you're not strong enough to defend it.